Hi, hello, and welcome, friends. We are back with another crafty video. I hope you're doing good and feeling good. My name is Faded Alien here on YouTube, and today I need to take you on the really fun 3D printed Pokemon adventure that I went on. So, bringing you back to, I don't know how many months ago, but I went to a really cool art store, and they had these 3D printed little creatures. This is a 3D printed Vaporeon, and I decided I had to take her home. I just got into playing Pokemon Go recently, and I was like, you guys, my Pokemon obsession is at a maximum. I have always loved Vaporeon as a character. I think she's absolutely beautiful, so when I saw her as a 3D little printed figure, I had to get it. I had to put my little paws on it and say, give me that pretty thing. And you just know that I have to make it a project. I can't just leave things alone. So this was no different. And I wanted to kind of take us on this adventure. So from having our kind of blank printed, beautifully blue Vaporeon into this gorgeous, glittery, scaly, realistic, I don't even know, just amalgamation of beauty. We are gonna go ahead and take ourselves step by step in this process. Let's get started. So one of the very first things I needed to do was color match Vaporeon scalation with our Vaporeon 3D print. So her base is very like brightish navy blue, and I needed to make the scalation more like an aquamarine tone. So I used my light blue acrylic paint, my titanium white, a little bit of yellow, and I kind of tinged that to be a little more aquamarine. After doing that, I actually found a scale tutorial breakdown on TikTok. Here's a screenshot of what I used to start doing the most basic shapes, and I also used references of the caiman lizard and the iguana because I wanted to have some large scales. I feel like Vaporeon IRL would have some scalation and be kind of like slick, tiny scales, you know, if she's an aquatic creature. So I wanted to incorporate some textures into this piece and not just do a singular coat. So I wanted to have some opportunity to make some scales. Y'all know I love my serpents and my reptiles, so we had to do it. Taking our Vaporeon scale base shade and using the literal smallest brush I own, I'm actually using this to make tiny little dots in different various sizes and shapes, and taking the scalation away from the face into the tail. So I'm using my dots to kind of base that away. It is a very repetitive process, and one of the things I regret is not using my dotting tool initially to place these scales. I just feel like they would have had a lot more of a more uniformed roundness to them instead of hand painting the physical shape of each scale, but it took a very long time. It's a very repetitive process. So I'm gonna go ahead and just fast forward us through the initial base layer of scale because we still have to do our highlighting, our little V white mark highlights, and add a bunch of other things to our Vaporeon. So let's just shimmy through this step. Moving into the face scales, this is where I really locked in with the green iguana as a face reference because I really like those predominant cheek scales that they have, so I wanted to use him and kind of lock those textures in. I did switch to my dotting tool for this step because there's a lot of intricate, very small scales on the face, so I wanted to make sure I could incorporate all of those evenly, and this is just the base shade, so we're almost to step 2. Thank you so much for hanging on. I know this process can be tedious, but it is completely worth it in the end, so stay tuned to see our final results. I was also working on our Vaporeon 3D print on our Twitch channel. I also stream every Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday on Twitch, so if you want to see any of our live crafting or live painting or tutorials, definitely come through there. And it's always a really fun time, so yeah. Other than that, I finally finished going over the last bit of base scales, and we can finally move to step 2, which is going to be highlighting and shading the scales. For the highlighted portion of the Vaporeon scales, the way that I produced that is I went into the base shade and I added 2 or 3 drops of titanium white acrylic paint just to slightly lighten the base shade, and then I used that at the very top of the scale with my tiny little acrylic paint brush, and I dot that halfway through so that the highlight kind of meets the halfway point of the circle. And I'm going to pop up a little picture of the diagram just so it's a little bit better to visualize what I'm doing, but I take these highlights and I go all over the body. Once again, this is a very repetitive process, so I do have it kind of speeded along just to speed along the process, and kind of go from there. But all of our scales are going to be very, very texture heavy, very, very bright, and stand out from the skin. I still wanted to have the skin or the blue exposed underneath just to give another layer of movement and potential for the articulation to really, really shine through. So I continue to leave those big gaps of blue present just to maintain the scalation and give it kind of like a skin look underneath. In all honesty, the most difficult parts to continue the pattern on were definitely more towards the paws and the tail, because the huge spikes across the tail definitely made it a bit of a challenge to kind of add the tinier texturing. So I kind of go back and forth between my small brush and my dotting tool here and there just to get into those smaller areas. And then I continue to carry that highlight all the way through the rest of the body. For the paws in particular, I gave a little bit of a highlight towards the tops of the paws because I wanted to really emphasize the foot shape. Instead of it looking like just a wad of plastic, I kind of used the highlight to my advantage. Leading into step 3, the final V-line to the scales, we're going to go ahead and use my thinnest brush, and I'm keeping this very, very flat line to make a V kind of shape across the top panels of these scales to give it a final act of a raise. Once again, this is a very repetitive process, so after I make my first line or my V mark with my titanium white, and this is solid titanium white, I'm going to pull this through the rest of the scalation following the continual scale flow and continue to go from there. At that point, I will say I was doing this project off and on for at least a couple of weeks here and there, and I did not film the final step through its entirety, but the final step is going to be to add a shiny coat to the very top of the scales, which is going to be our glitter. As y'all know, I cannot not add glitter, so we're going to go ahead with that step here in a moment, but I wanted to take you through and give you a little bit of a diagram and show in further detail how I placed our final touches of highlight. So that being said, we have the glitter dotted all over our scales, and I think it looks really cool. It's even on the arms as well. So without any further ado, we're gonna go ahead and hopefully paint and fill in the rest of our details and just kind of go from there. The frill was by far the easiest part of Vaporeon to color match because it's literally the same color as the scales, so I just recreated that color and put it through the frill. Just because it's easy to make does not mean it's easy to do, so it was pretty tedious. I ended up doing 5 layers on the frill and then going over the yellow areas on the fins, and I used my yellow tempera and titanium white just to dilute it and make almost a polleny yellow, and brush that across the fins and frills there. At this point it is just a layering game and kind of waiting for paint to dry, but after doing our tedious solidified layers, I'm now able to go in and work more on her helmet, which is going to be more of a teal shade. So I combined the base layer with a little bit of tempera black and mixed that through to make kind of a gray tone, and flooded that through the helmet and covered the tops of the yellow fins as well as Vaporeon's spinal spikes draping down into her tail. So this is also a layering game. I did 5 layers of each color, so it was just waiting for each layer to dry and then continuing to solidify those areas. Another new thing that I learned along this process is with those 3D printed figures, they tend to have a lot of grooves in them because of the way that they're built, and the filaments kind of like slowly warping and wrapping around to make your shape. So because of that, I had a bunch of very textured grooves throughout my Vaporeon. I've seen many different tips and tricks on how to flatten out and smooth out the base, but I didn't really prep it, so I just was fighting against the grooves, and that's another reason why it took me so many layers to do. That being said, you can absolutely file it down or smooth it out if you want to. I was just very impatient and very gung-ho about starting the paint process, so. Also, hindsight is always 20/20, and I spent so much time sitting there and trying to correct every stray line of paint where the yellow may have intersected through the helmet or where the helmet might have gotten onto the fin, and I wasted a lot of time doing that. So to save that and save you some time, just layer as you need and then worry about refining those lines at the very last minute, because girl, I cannot tell you how much time I spent going back and forth fighting these colors. Just don't do that. Don't do that. With the final layer of teal done to the tail spikes, we can finally focus on the eyes. Vaporeon has gorgeous lavender kind of maroony eyes, and I wanted to incorporate that. So I made a lavender base and then mixed that with a little bit of red acrylic paint to try to tint it to be a little more warm toned. And then I used that at the very bottommost point of the eye, and I start to fill that in accordingly. That being said, I did notice that Vaporeon has very cartoony eyes. She's an illustrated character, so I wanted to line the eyes as well. So I have to thin out my thinnest brush. I know it's already really, really thin, so I'm talking like single hair thin, and line the eyes with black acrylic paint before I fill in any of the rest of it, just to get that step out of the way and kind of be able to breathe after holding my breath and line the eye. Now filling in the median portion of the eye with just solid acrylic matte black, that was the easiest segment. I'm going to take my pure titanium white and just line the very, very top and give it a little shiny stripe. After that, I can now shift my focus more into filling her very cute mouth in. So I'm going to give it a corally pink and a little bit of a maroon shading into the tongue, and then fill in the rest of the portion with a very, very dark purple for the mouth, just to give it some shadow, kind of like her totem face here. And this was the final touch-up between the paint colors and just refining them and making sure everything's lined up. So this was the last time I did that. It is now time for our final touches of glitter, and we're going to be adding this to the frills. So what I did is I lined the inside of the white frills with my Mod Podge, and then I sprinkled my white refined iridescent glitter across it all through the veining, let that dry, and then tapped that out. Did the same thing with the yellow inside of the fins, just to give it more of a kind of glitter membrane, if you will. So I lined it on both sides of the frills, and then continued that process of letting the Mod Podge and the glitter dry, tapping that through, and then letting that kind of move section by section, and as well as into the eye. So I took a little bit of red purpley glitter, and I took a little bit of Mod Podge and lined the bottom of the eye, as well as added 2 pearlescent chunks of glitter into the titanium white streaks of the eyeball that we added, just to give it some extra shimmer. Now that that's done, she is completely glittered and glossified and ready for her reveal. So that being said, are you ready to see our new and improved 3D printed Vaporeon? Because I know I am. Ta-da! Isn't she so pretty and shimmery and sparkly and splendid? I am so in love with her. I think this turned out absolutely beautiful, and I learned so many different takeaways from learning how to paint on 3D print filament, how to do scale texture, and how to implement shadow. I love that you can see the layering to the scales as well. You can see a lot of intensity and layering, because some of the scales don't have glitter to allow it to better articulate. I just love every smidge and smudge of detail. I think this Vaporeon turned out absolutely stunning. If I find another 3D printed Pokemon, which one would you like to see painted? I would love to know. Thank you so much for hanging out with me during this really fun crafting session. I cannot wait to see what other 3D print or tiny models we get into. That being said, friends, if you want to get your hands on any of the really cool art stuff that we've been working on, I do have an art store. We have our 4th wall for all of our wearable merch, and our Printful for all of our posters and canvases. So if that at all intrigues your brain, be sure to check out the link below. Other than that, I do stream on Twitch as well if you want to catch us live making our crafts, and our YouTube here where I do our tutorials, our crafting, and just our general cosmic colorful chaos. So definitely subscribe and join the YouTube family. Thank you so much once again for hanging out with me. My name is Faded Alien here on YouTube, and I will see you very soon. Remember to stay safe, stay positive, and stay creative. I will see you next time, friends. Bye. You're dead and